I'm sitting quietly in my window seat when a woman with perfectly highlighted blonde hair, designer sunglasses perched on her head, and an air of entitlement that practically forms its own weather system approaches me. Let's call her what she is, a Karen. "Excuse me," she says with practiced politeness that doesn't reach her eyes. "I need your seat because I'm claustrophobic and can't sit in the aisle." The irony of this statement isn't lost on me. Just 15 minutes earlier, before I'd even arrived at the gate, this same woman had gotten into a heated argument with another passenger because she desperately wanted an aisle seat. I'd witnessed the whole thing while waiting to board. It all started in the boarding queue. I was patiently waiting my turn, scrolling through emails on my phone, when she walked straight past everyone, cutting to the front as if the line was merely a suggestion rather than an orderly system. The airline employee, a tall man with a kind face who'd clearly dealt with this type of passenger before, called her back. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but this is priority boarding for people with special needs or small children," he explained, gesturing to the sign. The woman made an Oscar-worthy expression of indignation and let out an exaggerated sigh that seemed to come from the depths of her very soul. "I should be in that category," she said without a shred of shame on her face. The employee blinked a few times, clearly trying to process the absurd information he had just heard. "Ma'am, only passengers who need medical assistance or who are traveling with children can board now," he explained with the patience of a Buddhist monk. She huffed and rolled her eyes, but, surprisingly, didn't insist further. She just got back in line next to me and started staring at my boarding pass as if she could change it with the power of her mind. "Are you at the window?" she asked, pointing to my ticket. I just nodded, already smelling trouble brewing. "Oh, what a coincidence," she said without the slightest emotion. "I'm in the aisle. You don't mind swapping with me, do you?" The question was purely rhetorical. She had already decided that I was going to change seats. I smiled, polite but firm. "Actually, I'd rather keep my seat. I chose this seat on purpose." The change on her face was immediate. The forced expression of sympathy disappeared, giving way to something between shock and contempt, as if I had just told her that I supported a war crime. "But I have claustrophobia," she said, as if it were a magic card that automatically forced me out of the seat I had paid for. Not that I'm insensitive, but let's be honest. If someone is so claustrophobic that they can't sit at the window, why on earth would they book a seat there in the first place? "Then you'd better talk to the airline," I replied, giving a slight shrug. "Maybe they can help you." She didn't like that suggestion at all. She pressed her lips together and crossed her arms, analyzing me as if calculating my level of resistance. Something told me that this battle had only just begun. Boarding began, and when it was our turn, I walked calmly onto the plane, feeling like a temporary winner. The problem was that inside that aircraft, my small triumph would turn into an endless war. If I had known what was coming, I would have asked the pilot to let me off with my suitcases. Nothing could have prepared me for the hell this woman was about to turn my trip into. After the small argument at the boarding gate, I thought she would give up and go on with her life like a normal person. But I underestimated the kind of individual who believes that the whole world exists to serve her. As soon as I got on the plane, I made my way down the aisle to my row and settled into the window seat, already planning to put on my headphones and pretend that nothing around me existed. But before I could even pick up my cell phone to put on some relaxing music, the shadow of my new archenemy covered my vision. "You can still swap places with me," she said, as if offering me the opportunity of a lifetime. "I'd rather stay where I am." Her eyes narrowed as if I'd said something deeply offensive. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, probably trying to decide which dramatic approach to use. It was then that she sighed loudly, loud enough for at least 3 rows ahead to hear, and began to settle into the aisle seat with theatrical exaggeration. She threw her bag on the floor, stretched out her arms as if she had just run a marathon, and, best of all, let out a long groan of exhaustion. I hadn't even put my seat belt on yet, and I already felt like I was stuck in an episode of a bad reality TV show. As soon as she sat down, she started moving frantically. The seat belt was too tight, The seat back was too hard. The space between her legs was ridiculously small. For a brief moment, I thought she was going to give up on the flight and run out of the plane, but to my misfortune, she remained there, huffing and puffing at no one in particular. The plane started taxiing to the runway, and before we even took off, I was already mentally exhausted. That's when she had the brilliant idea of adding to my misery. "It's very hot in here, don't you think?" I ignored it. My silence was my most powerful weapon at that moment. "Hey, aren't you feeling hot?" I pretended not to hear. Maybe if I kept quiet long enough, she would simply evaporate. She then held out her arm and called for a flight attendant. "Ma'am, the air conditioning on this plane is awful. It feels like we're in an oven." The flight attendant, who clearly dealt with people like this every day, smiled with that trained professional patience. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The ventilation system has already been adjusted to maintain the comfort of all passengers." The woman snorted, as if she had just been told that her first class had been downgraded to economy class on an interstate bus. "Well, then I'll have to open the window for a breather." And it was at that moment that I realized the level of insanity I was trapped in. She actually tried, with impressive confidence, to stick her fingers into the airplane's window frame and pull, as if she were in an old car where she could just roll down the window and stick her head out to feel the wind. I didn't know whether to laugh or pray. The flight attendant kept her composure, but her eyes showed a brief moment of disbelief. "Ma'am, the windows on the plane can't be opened." Then move me to a better ventilated seat. The flight attendant forced a smile and said she would check if there were any other seats available, but made it clear that the plane was practically full. The woman crossed her arms and looked indignant, as if the plane was conspiring against her. I thought the theater was over, but no, she was just warming up the engines. She began to move her legs in an exaggerated manner, banging her knees against the seat in front of her. Then she crossed and uncrossed her arms like a tantruming child. At one point, she began to sigh loudly, shaking her head as if I had committed a crime by existing next to her. And then came the final blow. "Girl," she called out to the flight attendant again, pointing at me. "This guy is making me uncomfortable." It was at that moment that my brain froze. What? I had been motionless from the moment I sat down. I didn't talk to her, I didn't lean against her, I didn't do anything. But somehow I was the problem. The flight attendant took a deep breath and asked, "In what way, ma'am?" He doesn't want to change seats with me, and that's making me anxious. I've already told him I'm claustrophobic, and he refuses to be the least bit empathetic." The woman turned to me as if I were a war criminal. "Aren't you ashamed of being so selfish?" The urge to reply was strong, but I knew that nothing I said would make any difference. The theater was rigged, and I was the villain of the piece. The flight attendant, no longer patient, tried to calm her down. "Ma'am, he's not obliged to change seats. We can try to find another solution." "That's absurd." She crossed her arms like a teenager who had just lost her cell phone. "That's pure selfishness. People like that shouldn't even be traveling." Yes, folks, a guy sitting quietly in my seat was the worst person on the plane. The flight attendant assured her that she would check another option for her, but the woman wasn't satisfied. No, she didn't just want another seat. She wanted the public humiliation of anyone who dared to contradict her. And somehow, I knew it was far from over. I wanted to believe that this flight would only last a few hours, that at some point that woman would give up her theater, accept her fate in the aisle seat, and get on with her life without turning a crowded plane into her private stage. But of course, optimism has never been my strong suit, and by now, I should have known that the people who make the most noise are the ones who know the least when to stop. The flight attendant, visibly tired of the situation, left to try and find another solution, while I pretended not to notice the curious looks from the other passengers around me. Everyone had realized that something was going on, but like me, no one wanted to get involved. The woman next to me crossed and uncrossed her arms, clucked her tongue, and made that annoying noise of people who want the whole world to know they're dissatisfied. She wanted me to feel guilty. She wanted someone around her to take her side and turn her into the wronged victim of an insensitive and cruel passenger. But all I felt was an absurd urge to jump out of the window. Ironically, that was the very window she wanted to avoid at all costs. She was moving around so much that it looked like she was trying to dig a hole in the seat. The backrest was already being pushed and pulled in such an exaggerated way that the person in the back row began to give her looks of pure hatred. I had given up trying to understand the logic behind it all, and then came the new wave of indignation. "I don't believe this," she whispered loud enough for the whole row to hear. "I pay for an expensive ticket and I'm treated like this. How disrespectful." I made an almost superhuman effort not to roll my eyes, as if she was the only person on that plane who had paid for a ticket. "This is absurd," she continued, now projecting her voice more forcefully. "I should have priority. I've traveled to so many countries, and I've never been treated with such disregard." There you go. Now came the travel resume, as if being an experienced traveler automatically made her the queen of the airlines. No one responded. No one sympathized. If she had expected a popular uprising against me, she was deeply disappointed. But she wasn't going to stop. "Do you see that?" She turned to the passenger next to her. "I'm being forced to sit here even though I'm claustrophobic. This man here," she pointed at me with a dramatic flair worthy of a Mexican soap opera, "refuses to change seats with me even though he knows about my medical condition. Isn't that a crime?" The man next to her, a middle-aged guy who seemed to have twice the patience I had, looked up from the magazine he was reading and let out a brief hum. That was it. That was it. The woman blinked, expecting more, perhaps a fervent endorsement, an indignant response, a promise of revolution against my reign of evil. But the man just shrugged and went back to reading his magazine, as if the whole situation was as irrelevant as a soap powder commercial. I wanted to hug him. Without popular support, without an angry crowd at her side, the woman sank into her seat with an expression of pure frustration. Then the flight attendant returned. "Ma'am, we've checked, but the flight is completely full. Unfortunately, there is no other seat available." Silence. I could feel the tension in the air. Something inside me told me that we were about to witness one of those storybook moments that airline employees tell each other during their lunch break. The woman closed her eyes and took a deep breath, as if gathering her strength for one last attack. "That's unacceptable." And that's when she started to cry. That's right. The tears came suddenly, accompanied by dramatic sobs and sniffles that would be the envy of any actress in a cheap romantic movie. She covered her face with her hands, shaking her head as if the whole world had turned against her. The flight attendant, now genuinely uncomfortable, tried to defuse the situation. "Ma'am, I understand that the situation is frustrating, but unfortunately, there's nothing we can do at the moment." The response only made things worse. "You don't understand. I can't sit here. I can't." She gripped the armrests as if she was about to be ejected into space. "I have claustrophobia. This is dangerous. You're putting my health at risk." I didn't know whether to laugh or be shocked, and then came the final card. I think I'm hyperventilating." Of course, she began to breathe rapidly, bringing her hand to her chest theatrically. A woman a few rows ahead turned around, concerned, and asked if she was all right. It was the moment she wanted. The audience was finally starting to pay attention. "I need to get out of here." She looked at the stewardess with moist, pleading eyes. "Change my seat or bring a doctor." A doctor. Yes, she really did ask for a doctor because someone refused to change seats with her. It was at this point that the pilot made an announcement over the loudspeaker that the plane was about to take off and that everyone should remain safely seated with their seat belts fastened. The flight attendant, left with no choice, looked at the woman and said, "Ma'am, we need you to remain seated. Can we help you with some water or something to calm you down?" The woman seemed to consider the offer, but when she realized she wasn't going to get what she wanted, she shut her face. "I don't need water. I need a new seat." "Unfortunately, that won't be possible." That was it. The battle reached its climax and the woman lost. She huffed, wiped her tears, and finally shut up. But I knew she wasn't satisfied. Silence was not a sign of giving up. It was just preparation for the next card. Because one thing was certain, if she didn't get what she wanted now, she was going to find a way to turn my trip into hell later. Her silence wasn't a sign of surrender. It was strategy, a calculated pause, a moment to gather strength before the next attack. And I knew this because I had seen this kind of behavior before, usually in children who had been thwarted and were now determined to sabotage the world around them. Only this woman wasn't a child, and unfortunately, I couldn't just offer her a lollipop and distract her with a cartoon on her cell phone. The plane finally took off, and for a brief moment, I had the illusion that the nightmare was over. The pressure in my ear, the roar of the engines, and the vibration of the aircraft made me believe that, with luck, she would give up the fight and accept her fate in the aisle seat. I was sorely mistaken. The war wasn't over yet. She was just about to change strategy. Just as I was about to put my headphones on, I noticed someone sliding into the middle seat between us. A young man in his mid-20s, with a friendly face and relaxed demeanor, placed his backpack under the seat in front of him. "Hey there," he said with a casual nod to both of us. "Looks like I'm your middle man for this flight." I hadn't realized the middle seat was even occupied. I'd assumed it was empty since no one had been sitting there during boarding. The woman's eyes lit up like she'd just found an ally in her crusade. "Oh, thank goodness," she said, her voice suddenly honey-sweet. "Maybe you can help me with a little problem. I'm severely claustrophobic, and this gentleman," she shot me a venomous look, "refuses to swap his window seat with my aisle. I'm having a medical emergency." The new arrival, let's call him Mike, looked between us with an expression of mild confusion. "That sounds rough," he said, settling into his seat. "But I actually picked the middle specifically. I'm a travel vlogger, and I'm filming a series about middle seat experiences." He pulled out a small camera from his pocket. "I'm documenting what it's like to always get the seat everyone hates." The woman's face fell. This wasn't going according to her plan at all. Mike turned to me with a grin. "You mind if I record some of our flight experience? Nothing intrusive, just some commentary and reactions." Before I could answer, the woman interjected, "Excuse me, but we're dealing with a serious situation here. I'm having a medical crisis." Mike looked at her thoughtfully. "You know, I actually did a segment on flight anxiety last month. Deep breathing really helps. In through the nose for 4 counts, hold for 7, out through the mouth for 8. She glared at him, as if he'd suggested she fly the plane herself. The first wave of attack came in the form of accidental inconveniences. In the first few minutes of the flight, she decided that she was the most restless person in the world. She fidgeted, crossed and uncrossed her legs, pushed the seat in front of her, and rummaged through her bag 10 times, as if looking for lost treasure, all so that I couldn't relax for a second. At one point, she started to stretch, but it wasn't a normal stretch. It was the kind of exaggerated movement that involved throwing her arms back and poking my ribs with her elbow, twice, 3 times. The 4th time, I looked directly at her. She gave me an innocent look as if to say, "Wow, what a coincidence. My elbow simply has a life of its own and has decided to manifest itself repeatedly in your direction." Mike, meanwhile, was quietly documenting everything with his small camera, occasionally whispering commentary into his device. Day 47 of Middle Seat Chronicles. I appear to have landed in the middle of a territorial dispute. The window defender stands firm while the aisle occupant employs guerrilla tactics. The woman shot him an incredulous look. "Are you recording this?" "Just observing the human condition at 35,000 feet, Mike replied cheerfully. "This is exactly the kind of authentic travel experience my viewers love." The next stage of revenge came soon after the in-flight service began. The stewardess passed by serving meals, and I just wanted to eat in peace and forget that I was living through a live version of a bad reality TV show. But the woman next to me saw this as another opportunity to turn my life into hell. She picked up her tray with the delicacy of a drunken gorilla and, in a clumsy move, caused her water bottle to fall straight into my lap. Cold water. On my lap. The sensation was exactly what you're imagining, extreme discomfort and the certainty that the universe was laughing at me. "Ah," she exclaimed with a false tone of shock. "I'm sorry, it was an accident." Of course it was. I grabbed some napkins and started drying myself off while she pretended nothing had happened and went back to eating, satisfied. Mike, who had witnessed the whole thing, immediately offered me his unused napkins. "Here, man, that looked deliberate if you ask me." "It was not deliberate," the woman snapped. "And are you still recording? That's an invasion of privacy." "Actually," Mike said calmly, "I'm in a public space, and I'm not focusing on you specifically. But this kind of conflict is fascinating from a sociological perspective. In my experience, people who cause scenes on planes are usually compensating for something. My viewers have a whole theory about it." The woman's face turned an impressive shade of red. "How dare you? Do you know who I am?" Mike's eyes lit up. "No, but that's exactly the kind of line my viewers love to analyze. Can you say it again, but maybe with more emphasis on who I am?" It was at that moment that I made a decision. If she wanted to make my trip a living hell, I would make hers a living hell too. Nothing aggressive, nothing explicit, just small acts of passive revenge that would make every second of the flight a nightmare for her. My first move was simple. I lifted the tray and made a point of eating slowly, eating each bite with the surgical precision of someone who has all the time in the world. Did she want space? Now she'd have to deal with my elbow positioned right next to her. After eating, I took advantage of the fact that I had a bottle of water on my tray and left it balanced on the table. Every time she tried to move and shook the tray, the bottle would threaten to fall over, which caused her to freeze in place, probably afraid of a cold shower like the one I had taken. The tables had turned. Mike, observing this subtle battle, leaned over and whispered to me, "That's psychological warfare at its finest. Mind if I include this in my passive-aggressive passenger segment?" The icing on the cake came when I realized that she was clearly trying to sleep. Sleep, the big problem. I wasn't in the mood to make it any easier. I put on my headphones, opened a video on my cell phone, and turned the screen brightness to maximum. The light flashed and reflected directly on her, forcing her to turn over every few seconds. If I couldn't sleep, no one would. "You know," Mike said conversationally, loud enough for her to hear, "I did a whole video on how to deal with difficult passengers last month. It got over 2 million views. People love seeing entitlement get shut down." The woman sat up straight. "Are you talking about me?" "Oh, I'm just making conversation," Mike replied innocently. "But if you'd like to give an interview about your perspective on seat entitlement, my viewers would eat that up." "This is harassment," she hissed. "Actually," Mike said, pulling out a small notebook, "I'm a part-time law student and legally speaking, harassment would involve." "I don't care what you study," she snapped. "Both of you are making this flight unbearable." A flight attendant, a different one this time, an older woman with a no-nonsense expression, approached our row. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her tone making it clear she wasn't in the mood for nonsense. Before I could speak, the woman launched into her well-rehearsed victim narrative. "These 2 men are harassing me. One refuses to give up his seat despite my medical condition, and the other is filming me without consent." The flight attendant looked at Mike's small camera, then at me, then back at the woman. "Ma'am, I've been briefed about the earlier situation. Unless they're physically touching you or making threats, they're not harassing you. And as for filming, as long as it's not interfering with flight operations, it's allowed." "But my claustrophobia." "If you have a documented medical condition that requires special seating, you should have notified the airline during booking or at check-in," the flight attendant said firmly. "Now, I'm going to have to ask all of you to keep the noise down. Other passengers are trying to rest." As the flight attendant walked away, Mike turned to the woman with a sympathetic expression. "You know, there's a great breathing technique for anxiety that works wonders. Would you like me to show you?" "I don't need your help," she snapped. "Actually," came a voice from behind us, "I'd like to see that technique." We all turned to see a distinguished-looking older gentleman leaning forward from the row behind. "I'm Dr. Stephen Miller. I'm a psychiatrist, and I frequently work with patients who have anxiety disorders, including claustrophobia." The woman's eyes widened. Here was an actual medical professional, exactly what she had been demanding earlier. "If you're experiencing genuine claustrophobia," Dr. Miller continued kindly, "I'd be happy to talk you through some coping strategies that might help you through the flight." The woman was caught in her own trap. If she accepted his help, she'd have to admit she was capable of sitting in her assigned seat with proper coping techniques. If she refused, she'd be revealing that her medical condition was nothing but a ploy. I'm fine now," she muttered, sinking deeper into her seat. "Are you sure?" Mike asked innocently. "This is Dr. Miller, an actual psychiatrist. Weren't you asking for medical help earlier?" After at least an hour of silent barbs, strategic water bottle placement, and Mike's cheerful commentary, which now included occasional input from Dr. Miller about the psychology of entitlement, she finally gave up. She threw her head back and let out a long, defeated sigh. For the first time, I felt that she had finally accepted the fact that she wasn't going to get what she wanted. Perhaps the great epiphany was this: the flight was still going to last a few more hours, and I was just as unbearable as she was, but now with backup. Time passed. The plane was already in full flight, and finally there was a moment of peace. No nudging, no dramatic staging, no fit of rage disguised as an accident. That's when I realized that the victory was mine. The woman, finally overcome by fatigue and lack of support, sank into her seat and fell asleep. I wanted to celebrate, maybe order some champagne, make a toast to the resistance against the tyranny of unbearable people. But instead, I simply closed my eyes and for the first time on the flight, relaxed. And then, to my surprise, I fell asleep too. When I woke up, the plane was already in the descent phase, and the woman next to me had her arms crossed, staring at the window with an expression that mixed anger and defeat. She said nothing, not a word. Mike was still awake, quietly editing footage on his phone. He caught my eye and gave me a thumbs up. "Got some great material," he whispered. "This is going to be the highlight of my Entitled Passenger series." As soon as the plane landed and everyone started to get up, the woman grabbed her suitcase and disappeared down the aisle without even looking back. And that was the end of the most ridiculous battle I've ever had to face on a plane. As I picked up my hand luggage and headed for the exit, Mike handed me a business card. "That was epic," he said with a grin. "If you want to see the final cut, check out my channel Seat Warrior. I'll be posting this episode next week. Window Seat Wars, When Karens Attack." Dr. Miller, who was collecting his own belongings, chuckled. "In 30 years of practice, I've never seen such a textbook case of entitled behavior. I might use this as a case study for my students, anonymized, of course." As we walked through the terminal, Mike explained that he'd actually been in the bathroom during boarding, which is why he showed up late to his seat. "When I got there and saw the tension, I knew it was going to be content gold," he admitted. "But honestly, that woman was something else. In all my travels, I've seen some characters, but she takes the crown." We parted ways at baggage claim, and I realized that I would never see that woman again in my life. She was just another annoying obstacle in the great chaos of the universe, a test of patience, a reminder that some people simply don't know how to hear the word no without turning it into a public spectacle. But in the end, I won, with a little help from an opportunistic vlogger and a psychiatrist with perfect timing. And sometimes, small victories like that are the tastiest. 3 weeks later, I received a message from a friend. "Dude, is this you?" With a link to a video titled Airplane Karen Gats Shut DOWN by Window Seat Warrior and Travel Vlogger Feat. Dr. Psychology. The video had 4.3 million views and counting. And if you like this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel.